shed this Tulip Edging in hand manipulated stitches, and all these years later it still remains one of my favorite edgings. It requires some decreasing, use of the garter bar, a chain cast on, and it's a non-roll edging, which is particularly nice for single bed work. So I've cast on a multiple of 7 stitches plus 2 for the left edge. Each repeat is 7 stitches, and I'm going to work a chain cast on over all of the needles. And you'll find this easiest to do if you pull out some slack from the tension mast so that the unit isn't fighting you, and you keep this edging nice and loose. When I've completed the chaining, I'm going to knit 3 rows, but after the first row, I like to stop and weave in the yarn tail so I don't need to deal with it later on. And now I need to reduce each group of 7 stitches down to 5 stitches by transferring stitches like so. So I'll have 2 needles working, 1 empty, a double stitch, a single stitch, a double stitch, 1 empty, and then I'll begin the next repeat right across. So I'm reducing down to 5 stitches per group, but you'll also notice that I'm leaving some empty needles here, and that isn't going to work for the final edging. So this is where the garter bar comes in handy. I'm going to eliminate 8 stitches, and I'll eliminate 4 at each side. So I'm going to do that. Let's see if we can use this to just open up all the latches. And then I'm going to take off all the stitches, every one of them, on the garter bar. You always start at one end and work your way across. These are going to be a little tight to pull over because there are doubled stitches on some of the needles. And you want to make sure you don't leave anything behind. Open the latches so you don't have to go back for that later. And I'm going to eliminate the 4 stitches or 4 needles on each side. Bring up the other needles, the empties. And then as I rehang, I'm going to have to continually lift off the garter bar and shift it over. So there's the first 2 stitches, and then I'll lift and shift to fill the next 3 needles. A double stitch, a single stitch, and a double stitch going on here. Lift and shift, place the 2 plain stitches between that repeat and the next, and continue across the work. Keep an eye out if any of your latches have closed, as I think one of mine just did. Right there. And 2 more here at the end. And then I'm going to knit 3 rows again. And this time I'm going to work the same kind of a decrease to reduce those 3 plain stitches down to 1. So I'll skip 2 between the repeats. There we go. Knowing that you have to end up with 2 plain stitches at the end will keep you on track if you begin to lose your place. And again, we'll bring all of those out. Put all of these stitches onto the garter bar. Open the latches and get rid of 4 needles at each end. And once again, replace the 2 edge stitches, the next triple stitch, and then the 2 stitches all the way across. I think you can see that this reduces down substantially. So for a large sweater, you may actually have to allow some seam stitches and work this trim in a couple of pieces. Push back 2 needles too many, so let's bring those out here. And then I'm going to knit 3 more rows. And one thing that you should notice from this sample is that I've got knit stitches against purl, and the easiest way to do that is to reform, because you wouldn't want to be doing this double bed. So what I'm going to do is reform the stitches in between each repeat. And I'll drop them down and latch them up. You could also use a double latch tool for this if you have one. Oops. And I might do the second one in from the edge, but I wouldn't even bother doing the edge stitch. It just isn't an easy one to do, and probably won't make any difference. When you're dropping stitches to latch up, always insert the tool first and then drop the stitch. Don't try to fish around and find it afterwards, because invariably you'll end up dropping more than you intended to. And you always want to keep some downward tension on the fabric so that the bars of the ladder are easier to manipulate for latching up. Okay. Now there's one more choice we can still make at this point. What I did here to help the border stand out was a row of crochet right across the needles. It's a decorative effect that you may or may not want to include, and I'll show you how I did that. The other thing to keep in mind is that we've now got, in this section, a 1x2 rib. And if you have a ribber, you may want to transfer over when you're done with this line, with this row of chaining. You may want to transfer over so that you can work this as a double bed stitch and carry the rib stitch up throughout the fabric. Not necessary, but a nice way to do it. So, to get that row of crochet, I need to move my carriage with a dead pass over to the right. And then I'm going to bring the needles out and try, let's just put one row on there, and try to keep the stitches in the hooks and work the row of chaining behind the fabric so that it shows on the knit side. If I did it on the side closer to me, that isn't going to show on the finished fabric. And because we want this to be decorative, we want to make sure we place it in the right place on the fabric. And then usually what I'll do is just lift that out of the way. Pass the yarn re-thread the carriage and go right on there. So there's the edging, and of course I've got my waste yarn there, and I didn't use a ravel cord, so let's just carefully snip this end of the waste yarn and see if we can pull it right out. There you go. So there's your little tulip edging. When this fabric is washed, the stitches are going to set, and you'll see that you've got a very permanent little ruffled edging here where each of those tulips points down.